I'm from New York. I got into music because my parents wanted me to play violin. My mother was a pianist and my father was a great music lover. And we lived in New York, outside of the city, and we were always going into the city. My parents were always taking me and my brothers to concerts, to musicals, to theater, to everything, to opera. They had a box at the Metropolitan Opera. My mother was a pianist and played chamber music all the time, and I played all the way through high school. And after I graduated high school, then I stopped playing because I felt like my parents had chosen it for me. I hadn't chosen it myself. So I stopped playing, and I asked, what is the reason people play music? I wanted to get down to the basics, and I let the answer come over time. I wasn't in any rush to play or to answer this question. And the most powerful answer when I was listening to a recording of a Vietnamese woman singing a lullaby to her baby. And that was the first answer. That's why people do music, to comfort, to love, to assure. And then I lived in a house with a lot of musicians, and we used to jam a lot. And I realized that was another answer to community and celebration. That's the most universal thing. And then the third thing is I went to a place in California called the Center for World Music. And I studied South Indian violin there with T.N. Krishnan, a wonderful South Indian violinist who passed away a few years ago. And I also studied South Indian vocal music, Tala, which is the rhythmic system, Solkatu, which is the drum syllables. And we couldn't just take violin lessons. That was amazing to me, that we had to sing, we had to know the rhythm and the whole system, and violin. So I was very inspired, and my teacher then asked me to live with his family in Madras. And I said no. He was going to teach me along with his 11-year-old daughter. And I thought about it, but then I realized no, it wasn't the time. And what I wanted to do though is, after being at that wonderful place, I was so in love with learning a tradition I knew nothing about, that is so deep and so old, complex, that I decided I wanted to study with many different violinists all over the world and learn different musical languages. It's the first time I realized that outside of European classical music, there are other traditions that are deep and amazing and have their own language. And on the violin is one instrument, but you can play so many different languages on it. So my idea was to travel around the world and sit at the feet of great players and make a big palette of colors. I felt like all of these languages have different timbres, different textures, different pitches, different scale systems, microtones. And I figured, I'd fill up my palette, and then eventually I'd make my own music with it. And I did do my solo improvised looped recording. That was the first time I got a chance to actually paint with that palette. But I realized the other day that I not only have all these musical languages in my head, but I also have a wall of instruments. Those are colors as well, different colors, the palette is here too. And what really turned me on to doing this is I grew up in New York, and my father's family was from Aleppo, Syria. And my mother's family was from Ukraine, and my mother was born in the Ukraine, actually. And I'm Jewish on both sides. So it was, we would go, there was always music at our family gatherings in New York. And when we went to the Syrian side of the family, there was always Arabic music playing, a record player with records stacked. And all day long, at the end of the meal, people would clear the tables, fold up the tables, clear, and then bring out a huge platter of fruit, and my grandmother would turn up the record player louder, and everybody would dance. And that was every single time we did that. And sometimes there were live musicians. And then I realized then that the violin can play all these different musical languages, and that's when I decided to explore. And I studied jazz at the time. I was in a Celtic rock group. I met an Irish fiddler in Boston, and I learned a lot of tunes from him. It was the South Indian violinist who taught me how to learn by ear, and then therefore how to teach by ear. That was my first one. And then I decided to move to New York because I felt like if I was going to do this traveling, I needed to be so fluid and free with my technique. And I was very tight. I didn't know how to shift. I didn't know how to solve problems. I didn't know how to make it sound like I wanted it to sound. So I found a teacher in New York who was amazing. His name was Gerald Beale. He was one of two. He was a twin. His brother was Wilfred Beale, and the two of them studied with Ivan Golani, and before Juilliard, they were amazing. Their vibratos matched exactly. It was so funny to see that. Anyway, I studied with Gerald Beale, and I lived in New York, and I forgot all about this idea of traveling around the world, because as soon as I got into New York and I was freelancing, I had to make a living, and I was really interested in how to play and getting my technique really good. But then I kind of got sucked in, and I did a lot of freelancing, symphony orchestras, opera, ballet, Broadway shows. I did a lot of recording studio work in New York. And then after a bunch of years, I came to Boston, and I joined a group called Libana, which is a women's chorus. They got together to learn the women's music from Bulgaria. And Mimi Rabson and I met at the violin players lesson, and we formed a group too and played Hungarian music. And then I got involved with a Greek group because somebody said, oh, my sister is in she has a Greek group, Sofia Bilidis, and she needs a violinist. So I got very involved in Greek music, and that's when I started collecting some of the liras that are up here on the wall, because my big question was, how is the violin played in all these different places? And what happened is when I went to these different places, I found out that there was, before the violin, there were other bowed strings called, in the case of the Greek music, liras. The lira is a singular, and the thing about the Greek liras is that you put them on your lap and the strings are raised, so you put your fingernails against the strings. So that was a whole different sound and a whole different idea. But I got a Greek Macedonian lira, a Thracian lira, a Cretan lira, and a Pontic lira, which is sitting behind me on the piano. I don't know if you can see it. That's an unusual one. That's from Asia Minor or Turkey, and it has 3 strings that are tuned in fourths. So that's very unique sound to play a string instrument in fourths always. The whole repertoire is that. And then somebody said, in one of my Greek gigs, somebody said, Beth, play a solo. And I said, how? I had no idea. So I started asking all my Greek musician friends in Boston. Actually, I got one answer from a woman named Eleni, a clarinet player from Greece, and I forgot her last name, but she said what she did was she learned all the solos, taksims or taksimia, of other musicians, and then eventually she could do it herself. So, okay, that's one answer, but it turns out then I got this connection to go to Turkey, and I knew that Turkish music, there's a whole pedagogy for teaching taksim, which is improvisations. So off I went to Turkey, and this instrument here became the instrument I played. This is played with a bow, but I also played Turkish music on the violin and other bowed strings, because there were always other bowed strings. I feel like whatever I'm interested in, I find the people to study with, I find the instruments, I find people to play with effortlessly. Anyway, that's my answer.